You're looking at one of 450 intercontinental ballistic missile silos that are strategically scattered across the vast expanse of the American Midwest. Each silo extends 100 feet underground, using the earth and concrete as protection from enemy strikes. These Doomsday Minuteman III ICBMs can reach anywhere in the world within 30 minutes. On August 20th, the New York Times revealed that the US government had approved a brand new revised nuclear strategy that was specifically focused on countering China and Russia, who they believe have nuclear weapons capabilities that will match the United States in the next decade. Not to sound like a doomer, but I hope somewhere on there it's written, continue to avoid nuclear war at all costs. But there's a potential challenge with executing this strategy. The Minuteman III missile's fast aging out. It first came online in the 1970s, and until recently they were programmed with old school floppy disks. We're approaching a point where their systems won't work properly anymore. There's a fierce debate within the military and congressional leadership about whether or not these kind of land-based nuclear missiles are even necessary anymore. Former Secretary of Defense James Mattis was not a fan. He even said that totally getting rid of them would reduce the danger of accidentally starting a nuclear war. On the other hand, America's proposed replacement next-generation Doomsday weapon is the Sentinel missile, which will cost upwards of $141 billion. So are ground-launched nukes an obsolete, unnecessary thing of the past, or a non-negotiable priority for national security? But first, I'd like to make an awkward segue and tell you about the only way this video is possible, which is thanks to our partner, War Thunder, the most comprehensive vehicle combat game in the history of combat games. You can take your pick of commanding over 2,500 different tanks, planes, helos, and ships from 10 major nations, even armored cars from the 1920s all the way up to the advanced fighter jets and battle tanks that we use today. No matter what type of player you are, you can choose from 3 different game modes available. Arcade for fast-paced matches, simulator mode for ultimate challenge, and realistic for the most authentic intensity. War Thunder has a worldwide community of 70 million players engaging in epic peer-to-peer battles every day. Play War Thunder for free on PC, PlayStation, or Xbox now by using my link in the video description. New and returning players that haven't played in 6 months will also receive a massive bonus pack across all platforms that includes multiple premium vehicles, the exclusive vehicle decorator, Eagle of Valor, 100,000 silver lions, and 7 days of premium account. It's available for a limited time only, so be quick. America's ICBM silos are spread across 5 states: Montana, Colorado, Wyoming, Nebraska, and North Dakota. They're located across what's known as the Great Plains. The Great Plains encompasses 1 million square miles. With its stunning beauty and sense of endless horizon, it provides an appropriate backdrop for these silent guardians. It extends from the United States into Canada, hidden beneath the serene grasslands. The location is no accident. This vast, sparsely populated area provides both security and strategic advantage, making these silos a critical element in maintaining global stability through the concept of mutually assured destruction. Across Montana, there are hundreds of nuclear missile silos, and many of them are hidden in plain sight behind just some fencing. They've been there since the 1950s and 60s, when they were first constructed during the Cold War. Surprisingly, the United States Air Force doesn't keep their locations a tightly guarded secret. Instead, they rely on what's known as sponge theory. Much like how a sponge absorbs water, these silos are intended to soak up strikes from an enemy nuclear attack. The concept is chilling, yet strategic. By making the locations of these silos known, the United States ensures that any adversary would need to allocate a significant portion of their nuclear arsenal to targeting these sites. This in turn diverts attention away from American cities, military bases, and critical infrastructure. The sheer number of these silos, with 150 spread across Montana alone, each roughly 4 to 18 miles apart, makes it nearly impossible for an enemy to destroy them all in one fell swoop. It's a calculated deterrent, much like how medieval armies would spread out their forces to make it harder for an invader to strike a decisive blow. There's such an open secret that each missile launch facility has their GPS coordinates and map of their location publicly available on Wikipedia. Each launch facility has wires that lead out to and control 10 missile silos. The launch crews consist of 2 officers who are there 24/7 around the clock monitoring them. They're down there right now as we speak, a few turns of a key away from Armageddon. Communication runs straight from them to the President and the Secretary of Defense. If the crew loses contact for any reason, aircraft flying overhead can assume remote control and fire off their assigned missiles to execute the president's orders. Redundancy after redundancy like this is built into the system. Today, the US military has 9 active missile squadrons deployed across 3 Air Force bases, spanning 5 states operating all ICBMs. 150,000 military personnel work here under United States Strategic Command. The Pentagon believes this gigantic shoot me sign would work as intended. That or Washington voted to make sure these weren't installed in their own backyard. But evidence for their usefulness comes from the fact that China and Russia are copying this strategy and building their own brand new missile silos out in the middle of nowhere as well. China operates 6 ballistic missile bases with 120,000 personnel. Their DF-41 ICBM, revealed in 2019, now has enough range to hit Washington, D.C. from Beijing. Since 2021, the People's Liberation Army has been busy digging 250 new missile silos in Yumen and Hami. Basically, it's like the Great Plains of China. China will have a total of 300. This is a major development that's caused alarm bells. These locations are deep inside China and specifically out of reach of US conventional cruise missiles and would require ICBMs to target. They're constructing 120 silos in Yumen. Unlike in America, China is doing it in a regimented grid pattern. It spans 300 square miles. Each missile silo in China is about 2 miles apart, similar to the United States strategy. There's some evidence to suggest that a lot of those missile silos are decoys or fakes, simply put there to be a sponge, just like the US strategy, to force those targets to be hit in the event of war. It's a bold strategy, but it seems to have worked at deterring nuclear war so far. However, critics say sponge theory is an outdated boomer war meta. They say it's rooted in outdated Cold War era thinking that doesn't reflect new realities in weapon systems. For one thing, the middle of the country is also America's breadbasket. Around half of all American farmers live in the Midwest states, with around 127 million acres of agricultural land across the country. Most of the country's corn and soybeans come from the Midwest, along with 15% of America's dairy products. Here in the United States, we call it flyover country because many people living in cities only ever see this part of the country when they fly from coast to coast. But it's also the nation's heartland. A concentrated nuclear attack on silos based here would see radioactive fallout carried far and wide on prevailing winds, contaminating much of America's food supply. Because of great variability in wind directions, the entire population of the United States would be at risk of lethal fallout. Critics of land-based ICBMs claim that they're strategically redundant, that their value has diminished because of the advancement of other technologies since the 1950s, like submarine-launched ballistic missiles and air-launched cruise missiles, which provide more flexible, survivable deterrent options. Those platforms are less vulnerable to a first strike, for instance. But the counterpoint to all this is that advances in missile defense systems could potentially reduce the effectiveness of submarine and air-launched cruise missiles over time. Supporters of these ground-launched missiles say that they have higher speeds and direct trajectories, which make them less susceptible to interception compared to other delivery platforms. Ground-launched locations have a reduced flight trajectory since missiles would travel north over Canada and the North Pole. This basically reduces the distance between the United States and Russia compared to some submarine-launched options. I sit here and I learn about all of this, and my first thought is, how are we supposed to know which scientists and which experts are right? Especially when there's a $141 billion incentive to say they're absolutely necessary to national security. It's a frustrating topic, and it's what Congress and the US military has to deal with on a daily basis. What we do know for certain, though, is that decades-old, aging Minuteman III missiles have been refurbished twice already and are nearing their absolute limits. This is because rocket fuel goes bad over time, along with other components of a warhead and flight system, so O-rings wear out, rubber corrodes, metal rusts. We're all fighting entropy in life, even nuclear missiles. Altogether, the Air Force estimates reporting that refueling and refurbishing those old missiles would be around $38 billion more expensive than just designing an all-new missile from the ground up. Great, so we're running out of time, and we need to make the right decision now. This is where the Sentinel missile upgrade program comes into play. If the United States is going to do this, then the cheapest option is to replace all missiles with a new series called the LGM-35 Sentinel. The problem is, it's already 2 years behind schedule and $45 billion over budget before a single missile is even on the production line. It's currently 80% higher in cost than initial estimates back in 2019. That's a lot of money even for the military-industrial complex. To put that into context, with $141 billion, you could buy around 500,000 average-priced homes in the United States. Proponents of the weapon argue that it's literally the top defense priority and that cost doesn't matter, it's not a factor. In 2010, U.S. Nuclear Posture Review argues that if any single leg of the nuclear triad is allowed to lag behind the others, it ceases to be a credible threat altogether, diminishing the combined deterrent of all three and making nuclear conflict more likely, not less. So why is it so expensive though? Well, part of the insane cost comes from the fact that the Minuteman III series is so ancient at this point that all people and designers and engineers who built them have passed away already, so no one really knows exactly how to make them anymore using today's systems. That might sound hard to believe, but the entire field of industrial manufacturing has changed dramatically since the 1960s and 70s. Imagine if they just stopped building computers in 1970, completely banned building computers in 1970, it would take a minute to refigure how to do that today. That might be a bad analogy, but you get my point, because today's design and manufacturing techniques are more capable and sophisticated in many ways, but replicating methods common in the mid-20th century is a very different ballgame. Major components of the Minuteman III don't lend themselves to what's called computer numerical control machining. There are very few companies that still have the industrial capacity and expertise to make one of these. It's not as simple as just contacting SpaceX. While there's been an explosion of private spaceflight companies over the past few decades, their emphasis has been on building efficient, reusable, liquid-fueled rockets, not the sort of large-diameter, high-thrust, solid-fueled rockets like the ICBMs use in the boost stages. Northrop Grumman won the initial contract worth $85 billion. Within 2 years, the engineers at Northrop Grumman had a fully designed replacement. The Air Force officially adopted the proposed design in April of 2022. Sentinel has the capacity to carry up to 3 warheads that can each direct themselves to entirely separate targets. However, to try and bring down global tensions, the United States and Russia signed the New START Treaty in 2010. This is actually one treaty that the United States and Russia agreed to renew until 2026. So as a matter of policy, American ICBMs only carry 1 warhead per missile, plus whatever decoys or highly classified penetration aids the Air Force includes. The Sentinel will be fitted with existing stocks of the W-87-0 thermonuclear warhead. These have a blast yield equivalent for about 300 kilotons of TNT. For context, imagine 300,000 one-ton TNT bombs exploding simultaneously. The Sentinel missiles will later be upgraded to the W-87-1 at 475 kilotons. Just the fireball of it alone would be almost 2 kilometers wide, and the shockwave would still be 1 psi of overpressure beyond 15 kilometers. The W-87-1 warhead itself represents a restart of the American military industry here. The United States hasn't produced a fully manufactured nuclear warhead since the end of the Cold War over 30 years ago. A lot of this manufacturing expertise has been lost to time. Kimberly Boudel, director of Lawrence Livermore Laboratories, said, quote, "Over the last 2 decades, our adversaries have rapidly modernized and expanded their nuclear capabilities, while the United States lost its ability to manufacture critical warhead components as facilities aged and capabilities atrophied without a consensus on the path forward. The W-87-1 modification program changes that. Relearning to design, engineer, and produce a warhead presents a tremendous challenge, but we are working side by side with our partners to deliver for the nation and transform the nuclear security enterprise in multiple critical areas." A big part of the constant cost overruns and delays for the whole Sentinel missile program are thanks to the long lull in specialized manufacturing. The Sentinel program blew over its budget so much that it triggered an automatic congressional review thanks to the Nunn-McCurdy Amendment. That act was signed into law back in 1983 to rein in ballooning cost of American weapons development, forcing the DoD to submit a review to Congress on any project that exceeds certain thresholds. Because the Sentinel missile program had exceeded 50% of its original cost estimates, the program represented a critical breach of the amendment, automatically canceling the entire project unless the Secretary of Defense could convince Congress that the program was necessary and the increasing costs were justified. On July 8, 2024, the Pentagon submitted their findings of the Nunn-McCurdy review, arguing that the Sentinel program should continue. Speaking anonymously to Inside Defense, a DoD official said, quote, "Broadly speaking, the root cause analysis conducted as part of the Nunn-McCurdy process found that a lack of effective systems engineering led to an immature technical baseline at milestone B." That's bureaucratic speech for, look, we haven't had to build one of these things in 50 years, so give us a break, okay? Now, Sentinel isn't only about the missile. It's also about modernizing every component associated with its infrastructure. That means tearing out old 1970s tech from existing silos and replacing it with new, fully digital systems. That means LiDAR scans of silos to make sure that they'll withstand the kind of impacts that they were designed for, even decades after they've been exposed to elements. Sentinel is essentially 5 programs in one, and site upgrades account for the majority of the cost overruns, not the missile design itself. Using the existing silos definitely saves money, but there's over 7,500 miles worth of copper cables alone in America's missile silos. All of it needs to be inspected, recertified, or replaced as needed. Dr. William LaPlante, the director of Nunn-McCurdy Review, said that Sentinel is truly a historic program to modernize the land leg of the triad, and its scale, scope, and complexity are something we haven't attempted as a nation in 60 years, end quote. So who you believe in all of this is going to depend on how you feel about the missile program. But from their point of view, the proponents of it, it's meant to be safer and reduce the risk of accidental nuclear war. For all the hype around adopting a new missile, the Sentinel was designed less around adding new capabilities over the old Minuteman III, and more about updating the ICBM to new standards that'll extend out for the next 50 years. The Sentinel has improved safety and security features over the older missile. During the Cold War, computer glitches on both the United States and Russian side led to multiple close calls, and since then cybersecurity has added a whole new dimension here. Supporters of maintaining the land-based ICBMs say that they underwrite every operation and negotiation taken by America, that they back up effective diplomacy with other nuclear powers. Sentinel's boosters use a new solid rocket fuel chemistry that are stable enough to only need refueling every 40 years instead of every 20, which supporters argue will save billions of dollars in life cycle costs over the many decades of service that these missiles are expected to last. Static ground-based nukes are the cheapest option since they don't need expensive submarines to deliver. They don't need separate transport erector launcher vehicles like what China and Russia use on their road mobile systems. Ultimately, the debate around adopting the Sentinel missile is a controversial one, as it keeps a large nuclear stockpile in the first place. There are good arguments on both sides for how either position keeps us safe or less safe. Would the massive budget for Sentinel be better spent on another defense priority, or maybe on buying 500,000 homes? Does a land-based nuclear deterrent really work? Or have other factors prevented nuclear war more than just the threat of mutually assured destruction? These are tough questions that get to the very heart of defense strategy in the nuclear age, and I don't believe any one person has all the answers. But the decisions we make today, as America's future ground-launched nuclear program continues, it'll certainly shape our future no matter what direction we go in. Thanks again to War Thunder, and a reminder that for new and returning players that haven't played in at least the last 6 months, you'll get a massive bonus pack. Just head over to the link below to check it out, sign up, and get started playing the game today. This bonus is available for PC, PlayStation, and Xbox, but only for a limited time, so check it out now.